Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Accommodation Show. This week, it's my absolute pleasure to be joined by someone that I think is absolutely wonderful, Mr. Jamie Lane from Airdna. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to join. I've been wanting to be on for years now.
It's such a pleasure to have you on the show, to get to meet you. And folks, if you haven't heard of Jamie Lane, if you haven't heard him speak, he's absolutely incredible because he's got a huge amount of depth in the industry and he really understands what's going on and is able to take a whole bunch of concepts and distill them and make them practical for you as a business owner. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be distilling things down to give you things that you can do on a weekly or monthly basis, or that you should be doing to improve your bookings. But Jamie, how about you give us a bit of an intro? Let us know a little bit about your role at Airdna, but also what got you into that position.
Yeah, so I'm the SVP of Analytics and Chief Economist at Airdna. So all that means is I look at data all day and I try to make sense of what the data is saying. I joined Airdna in October of 2020. And prior to that, I spent 10 years as an economist in the hotel sector. And as part of that, I was forecasting hotel performance, looking at hotel booking trends, trying to help hotel operators sort of make sense of what was going on in their industry. And I met a guy named Scott Shafford, 15, and he started this company called Airdna tracking what was going on in Airbnb. And I was like, Scott, I need all this data. Just I'm going to hook up my truck, my data pipeline to it, just send it all to me. I want to start making sense of it. We became good friends. And 5 years later, he convinced me to join Airdna and sort of look at short-term rental industry performance data on a full-time basis.
Yeah, wow. So yeah, like I was saying before, you have been around for a little while. And it's kind of interesting as well because that long ago, Airbnb was such a nascent industry, or that whole term, and it's had such a dramatic change in terms of the tools, the technology, in terms of scale as well, in terms of an industry and really the industry understanding what the industry is, which I would still argue, if you look at hotels that have been around for millennia, short-term rentals, renting out your own home, it's just something that, yes, there's been bed and breakfast, but in this kind of format, as the world has never really seen it. So we're kind of still figuring things out as we go. So you said the one thing I just wanted to quickly cover off is, what's the difference between being an economist and a data scientist?
Yeah. So a data scientist is more like actually coding models, building pipelines for data, analyzing a data scientist is going to build a revenue management booking model of all right, given these bookings, you should adjust your rates by this amount and do all this. As an economist, my role is really looking at the data at a high level and a sort of a more micro level, but sort of relate what's going on to the economy, relate what's going on in consumer spending, relate what's going on across the entire sort of lodging ecosystem into what's actually happening in our space and how you should be reacting to it. So I'm looking at sort of global economic data, cross-border trends, where people are traveling to, where they're not traveling to, what's happening in sort of the global pricing of goods, how much money are people spending on goods, where travel sort of fits into that, and help people understand overall how you should be running your business. So should you be investing in short-term rentals right now or not? Should you be increasing your rates, decreasing your rates? Should you be looking to invest in Australia right now, or the US, or looking into Colombia?
Yeah. And so, but if we're looking at sort of economics in that way, it is quite broad, right? So we're looking at a whole continent, a whole country, or the entire world. But then you'll have someone that would be listening right now and saying, well, how does this apply to me? I'm in a regional town in outback Australia, or a regional town somewhere in Indonesia. It doesn't really matter. Jamie, that's all good and well, but how can this possibly have anything to do with how I run my business?
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, what I do is I'm looking at those now, taking it into the short-term rental sector of what are the broad booking trends that are impacting how people are staying in short-term rentals, using short-term rentals. So during the pandemic, we saw a massive increase in longer-term stays. So people weren't taking short trips for business anymore. They were taking long trips, maybe a month or longer with their family. They were changing jobs. They maybe didn't need to work in any single locations. And we saw the rise of digital nomads. So tracking what are the cities, what are the types of markets that we're seeing increase in bookings from that. These days now we're seeing really the type of stays that are happening on Airbnb really bifurcate of when short-term rental stays are the best type of accommodation maybe for that stay, whether you're traveling with your family, you're traveling with a large group. We're seeing demand for those type of stays really expand. And then when you look at the type of stays, like 1 or 2 day stays in urban areas, which is really, I think that was what Airbnb really built its sort of bookings on the back of in the early days. Those type of bookings are actually decreasing as competition with hotels really heat up. So when you sort of talk about that, and then like think about the operator in the outback of like, all right, like we're actually seeing massive growth and demand in these rural type areas. And that's actually continuing to this day. Like that wasn't just a COVID trend.
Yeah.
And we're seeing more and more people travel to the listing as the destination, as opposed to the city being a destination and let me find the type of stay that I want.
Yeah.
So sort of
Fascinating.
picking out that trend.
Yeah.
And then as you think of like, all right, I want to maybe buy a property in the outback, like, am I going to get a 2-bedroom condo? Or am I going to invest in a 5-bedroom home that I can put a lot of amenities and make that be a destination that someone's going to book my property and make that trip happen? Like that's really a broad trend that we're seeing.
Yeah, fascinating. I'm sure that you know Will Slickers, and I remember many years ago, I think it was just pre-COVID, that he started Destination Air Awards. And now that I think about what you're saying, I guess he was way ahead of his time in terms of where the trends are now going, right?
Yeah. And I get surprised every day when I go on like on Airdna's site. We do this thing where like top revenue generating properties in an area, and you can click on any market in the world and see what properties are doing the best. Like you go into any market and you click and you see like what these people are doing in terms of investing and like real making their properties being a destination. I know it gets me excited about like I would love to just go and experience that place,
Yeah.
as opposed to like just trying to find a spot to stay in, like when I'm going to do something else.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm just going to touch on that for a second because I want to go into the trends. And then also, folks, if you are listening, you're like, when are they going to start talking about what I should be doing on a weekly basis? This is all leading to that because giving you the context will give you the foundation for you to be able to make the right decisions later on so that you won't have to listen to Jamie again in a few months' time. You go, oh, how did he come up with those ideas? Well, it all stemmed from all of this part here. Those trends, though, it's super fascinating because if we talk about Airbnb and their marketing, they started to really double down on this and sort of really kind of going, a hotel has this offering and we have this offering, which is impossible in a hotel to have multiple rooms and to share as a family. And they're able to create that distinction and that definition in their marketing a while ago. I almost feel, though, that was almost a year and a half ago that I started to see those adverts pop up. And now, as far as I know, already mid-year this year, they're going to start evolving again into the next iteration of that. But then all of that work that they've done has kind of translated into the data that you can see now, as well as consumer trends and behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right. I think Airbnb and Vrbo have both pushed into brand marketing of like, what should you be thinking about when you like want to book this type of travel? And Vrbo's gone heavy into like have the place to yourself, and Airbnb's gone into like think of how your trip could be different if you were staying in an Airbnb.
Mm-hmm.
That I think has really resonated with people in how they're now using the platform to book travel. And if that continues, like you start to sort of multiply the impact around like, should you be thinking about doing with your listings to make it really a differentiated experience versus staying in a hotel? Because I think when, and you think back to like 2018, 2019, Airbnb's big thing was business ready units. Like, how do you get the business ready badge of like that you've got an ironing board and
Mm,
you've got a desk and like you've got these basic things to really make it
sure.
attractive to business
Yeah.
travelers in your market. And I think entirely flipped on its head.
Yeah. So kind of, and it's interesting, kind of that direct competitor to hotels, and now it's like, well, hold on a second, we can just differentiate ourselves, which is fascinating. I'm an advocate for all types of accommodation. It doesn't really matter if it's a hotel or a campsite. I feel that providing the service is absolutely crucial, and I feel that educating the industry as a whole is incredibly important to everybody that sits within it. And that threat of yes, you can take dollars off of the table from a hotel by having this new economy that's happening around short-term rentals, but they are different products in the end. And it feels like finally Airbnb is saying, hey, we're going to keep on differentiating our product, and having USPs the hotels just can't achieve or do. Now, Jamie, I know that I want to be conscious of our time today because I know that you've got so much insight to give. And I wanted to make sure that we covered off on some of the things that we talked about before the show. You said you were looking at data and trends before we got onto the episode. I imagine that this movement towards families and that sort of thing was part of it. Were there other bits and pieces that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah. And one is just like what we're seeing on the supply growth side, like in the US and Australia. We were in a period of, I would say, rapid supply increases. In the US, it was really 2022 into 2023. In Australia, it was really in 2023 into 2024 that we saw and really accelerated supply growth. Both markets now really muted supply growth, like barely growing 3 or 4%. So as an operator, as an investor, someone that's like actually in these markets, like, and we saw occupancies drop pretty significantly and over these past few years. In Australia, we reached a peak at the end of really 2023 that on average of up over 58%. Pre-COVID, we were averaging 52%. So like there was a massive increase. A lot of supply came out of the market during COVID, um, during the lockdowns. Um, Demand did come back pretty significantly. And now we're still running above pre-COVID occupancy levels, like 54% on average. So above, but I mean, it has come down, and it does look like with supply slowing in terms of growth, like we're stabilizing at these occupancy levels of sort of higher than pre-COVID levels. And why I want to sort of talk a little bit about these trends is like, I think it sort of tees us up into what you should be thinking about and analyzing your market on a regular basis. Because, and if we were talking at this time last year, I'd be saying, Bart, like supply growth is increasing massively. We're seeing greater than 10% growth across Australia. We're seeing greater than 15% growth across the US. Like this is a really competitive environment. And if you're not seeing bookings, like you should be thinking about cutting your rates and making sure that and you're getting bookings because it's a really competitive environment. The environment we're in today is entirely different. We're seeing occupancy stabilize. We are seeing some pricing power come back. In the US last month, ADRs were up like 4%. In Australia, they were up almost 5%.
Yeah, wow.
So we're, and this time last year, they were down. So we are seeing the environment change, which should impact on how you're thinking about pricing your property going out into the future.
When you're looking at ADRs in that way, so that's the average daily rate, folks, for those of you that don't know the acronyms, and occupancy is number of nights booked over the number of nights available. So if you've got 100 nights available and 54 of them are booked, that's your occupancy. So you can kind of figure that one out. When you're looking at the ADR being up by the 4%, as you just said, is
Yep.
that January on January? It is, right?
Yeah,
From year on year.
yeah, that's in January. And there's all sorts of moving pieces and to that of like the trends that are happening across the country. In the US right now, we're still dealing with sort of impacts of hurricanes, impacts of fires, we're actually having a decent ski season, which all goes into that. So these broad trends and that we're talking about, like for most people are like, and who cares if on average a million listings were able to increase the rates by 4%? But it does give you the context as you start to think about your market and what's happening in your market and what other hosts are doing in your market to start more broad as we start diving into what your competition is actually doing.
Yeah, right. So it's, your lens is very, very broad to start off with, just to see sort of maybe how the world's going, then maybe how your country's going, then maybe how your state is going, and then sort of drilling down into your hyperlocal area to really understand how things are changing, being impacted. But okay, let's say someone's listening, they're like, oh, so average daily rates have increased by 4% in January. Okay, so let's say that's the number that we're looking at. Does that mean that we're changing? How are we adjusting our plans for February or March? Is that what we're looking at, or are we looking at the following year? We've got the data, we've made an analysis. How do we then translate that into an actionable insight or an actionable something actionable that you're going to take in your business?
Yeah. So how I think about it is because I know my numbers for my property. I've got a sense of for each property, how it's booked out into the future. Like I've got a property up in North Georgia. It's been running relatively well through February. I've got a booking at the beginning of March, but after March, like it really falls off a cliff. So on a day-to-day basis, I've got to make a decision of like, all right, is it typical that I don't have any March bookings yet? And if my competitors have a lot of March bookings, maybe I'm overpriced and I need to be adjusting down. If no one has any March bookings, and I know that from looking at the data that a typical lead time or the time between someone books to when they stay is like 2 or 3 weeks. So sitting here in mid-February, like I don't really need to be worried yet about the end of March. But as we start getting into the first week of March and I don't have any bookings yet, then I start to need to be worried and I need to be comparing my prices versus my competition and see how everyone is adjusting. And those are sort of the week to week adjustments I'm sort of mentally and physically making of, all right, how am I booked? How's my competition booked? When is my competition getting bookings? Sort of looking at, and I think of it as like, and recent bookings, like over the past week, what dates are people actually getting booked at? Am I getting bookings during those same time periods? And if I'm not, like, I've got a problem. And that problem could be that I'm just overpriced on those days, or it could be a larger problem of my property just isn't competitive with what people are actually booking in that market now. So there's typically on a week to week basis, it's just getting a sense of like, okay, how are my bookings doing compared to my competition? And then maybe more on a monthly or even quarterly basis, is taking a broader look at my market. How many new listings are coming in? So how is supply growing? What are the properties that are consistently getting booked? What are the amenities? What are the areas that they're in? What are the characteristics of those properties? Are they smaller properties? Are they larger properties? Are they all putting in these new amenities that maybe I don't have? And that lets me sort of get a sense of like, all right, how do I compare? And what are the levers I need to be pulling to make sure I'm getting booked? Because I don't think anyone wants to be, at least I don't consider short-term rental operations being a passive business. Like I'm constantly having to adjust prices. I'm constantly having to respond to and how guests are liking my property and whether it's getting top reviews or not, and then making sure that it's attractive to future guests to book.
Yeah. Whoa, so many different things you've covered there. Like really, and I recommend that if anyone's watching this, you go back to that part and have a listen to all the different elements that we're talking about, because you've got the booking lead time that we're talking about. We're talking about amenities, what different amenities people have. But if you can go back for a second, Jamie, and just if you were sitting down with, let's say, your mum, you were trying to explain to her what she needs to look at in her Airbnb business on a weekly basis. You said, you need to do these 5 or 10 things in this particular order. What would you have a list that you could give her?
Yeah. So my mom operates 4 short-term rentals up in Maine. Uh,
Is this all fictional or are we for real here?
for real.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Though I can't get her to adjust her prices to save my life. This is a conversation we actually have on a regular basis, though, because this is about the time she usually calls me freaking out because it's a summer rental, it's seasonal. So if we're getting to the end of February and she doesn't have May and June booked out, she's starting to get worried. So I'm going to get the call of like, Jamie, I'm not booked. Should I start lowering my prices? And that's where I'd start I'm looking at your forward bookings out really by month, and looking at your property's occupancy level. So how many nights you have booked as a percent of the total nights available, and then how that compares to the market in those same months. And then the other thing I'm doing on I would call it weekly basis, is making sure that there's no major spikes in bookings. And when those spikes are, I was actually just looking at the data this morning for Atlanta, and it was like a massive spike in bookings over the past 7 days in July. And it's like, it's not July 4th weekend, it's middle of July. I'm like, what is happening? And I live in Atlanta and I don't know what's happening. And so I Google it and it was like, oh, Beyonce just announced her tour date.
It had to be or Tay Tay, Beyonce.
Right. And those special event nights can be some of the most profitable nights for a short-term rental operator. If you think of like when you're actually going to make your money, like fortunately, most events are the same time every year. And like you can know when you've got to make sure your nights are 2 or 3x above your total. But if something like that is getting announced, and you've got to have a way to stay on top of it. And looking at booking activity, while it's not the best, because if you're the first one booked, like maybe that's and you lost your opportunity, but at least I'm picking that up and monitoring it on a weekly basis. There's only like 300 bookings so far, but I can tell you it's going to accelerate as people start to make their travel plans.
Check this out. Inadvertent plug for SiteMinder. I don't know if you're familiar with SiteMinder. So I was at one of their events before No Vacancy last year, and I believe they've got to a stage where if they detect the spikes, they'll text you, and they'll be like, "Hey, there's been spikes going on. Get onto this, whatever it is." We don't, maybe without having like the cause for it, but at least they've got the symptom going, "Hey, something's happening over here. You have to have a look at this." But Jamie, look, I'm going to push you a little bit because we are running out of time. We do like to keep these about half an hour long, so we've only got roughly about 4 minutes to get all of your best stuff out of you. In terms of the weekly things,
yeah.
Is there anything else? So what we're looking at is any kind of spikes. So we're also looking at how we're performing month by month ahead of time. So we're saying, January, February, March. Are we booked up? What is it looking like? What else are we looking at?
Yeah, on a weekly basis, it really is just like, are there any months that I need to pay attention to of adjusting? Like I'm above or below sort of market occupancy. I should be adjusting up or down my rates. Are there any spikes that I need to go in? Because on a weekly basis, I only want to be spending 10, 15 minutes per property, sort of getting a sense of market trends. Like it doesn't take that much time to look at it. On a monthly or quarterly basis, that's where I really want to get a sense of like, how is supply changing in my market? I want to get a sense of, in general, how are other hosts increasing or decreasing their rates? Like, are we in a trend where everyone else is discounting rates? And I need to be, those sort of trends can sort of compound on themselves. And if everyone else is decreasing and I'm not decreasing, all of a sudden I'm not meeting sort of my occupancy expectations. I want to get a sense of, are occupancies increasing or decreasing on average in my submarket or across my comp set? So are people getting booked more or less than they were at the same time last year? Because that's going to inform sort of my broader pricing discussion. And then there are changes in booking behavior over time that I can see that I need to maybe thinking about my portfolio strategy. So if I've got a couple of properties and I'm seeing way more bookings happening in larger properties or properties with a pool or properties with a hot tub? How can I be adjusting my property or investment strategy to take advantage of those?
Normally, when I finish up an episode, Jamie, I'm like, what are your top 3 tips? But I think you've actually just loaded up everybody with 20 tips. And what I'd recommend that everybody does, if we'll put a lot of this stuff in our show notes and on the email, but if you are listening, you're like, hey, I missed all of that, jump onto YouTube, click on transcripts, grab this transcript, and then get ChatGPT to summarize those key elements. And the one thing that's really obvious to me from this conversation is that this is like a good half a day to a day's worth of masterclass session, at least an hour and a half of dealing with each of these different topics and ideas and concepts, giving people those practical things that they should be doing, and also the tools that are necessary for it. Now, I'm going to wrap us up because those tools, obviously, Airdna will help with a lot of those data points. Is that right?
Yeah, and Airdna has a lot of it, but you can get a lot of these data points from Price Labs. You can get it from Beyond, and you can get it from Airdna. You can also get a lot of it from your pricing softwares that you might be using already.
Yeah, terrific. So that's very kind of you, not just to plug Airdna. I was going to say, where else can they get it from? So there are tools out there. And one thing that I would say, a lot of people don't know, but I do a fair bit of consulting with businesses, typically anywhere between 20 and 100, 150 properties. And with a lot of these strategies and these tools that I've introduced to people, we've seen their businesses grow by 50% year on year with no added properties. And it's just insane if you can get it all right, if you can get your strategies right around direct bookings, around your listings, around your descriptions, around your property management system, being listed on the right platforms. And if you add a layer of data that Jamie's suggesting, you can go a lot further and really grow your business and make a big impact without having to spend more. And interestingly enough, I was talking to Tim Rosolio from Expedia, and he was saying something similar. Back in the day, it was all about just adding more properties. Now it's about this year in particular, it's going to be about optimizing those properties. And that's exactly what you've led us to from this episode. Are there any final thoughts as we wrap up, Mr. Jamie?
Yeah, and I would just say, the data can be scary. I know that because we talk to people. We see that over half the industry doesn't adjust their prices. Over 50% of listings have fewer than 4 rates in their forward calendar. And that just blows my mind. And so many people are leaving money on the table by not only optimizing rates during the peak times, but not lowering the rates enough during the off peak times to drive bookings. Yeah. And start simple. And you can sort of add in over time, but it's well worth the time and effort to figure out how to optimize your rate.
And look, folks, last year I did a training course with Richie with all the fundamental steps for pricing. So if you've never done any pricing before and you don't know what's going on, if occupancy, ADRs, minimum length of stay, if all these terms are foreign to you, we covered that in that 5-day training. We'll leave a link in the comments as well. Folks, if you are tuned into the episode on Apple, on Spotify, leave us a review, give us a thumbs up. It makes a huge difference. If you're on YouTube, do you know how much it costs you to subscribe? Absolutely zero. So I encourage you to hit that subscribe button. What it means is that we can keep on growing and doing more of this amazing content, getting amazing people like Jamie in front of us to talk about his deep knowledge that he's been gathering for years, and he provides it for free to add value to you. Jamie, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Is there any particular way that people should find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm active on LinkedIn and Twitter, Jamie Lane. If you're enjoyed this type of conversation, I do host my own podcast called the STR Data Lab, where we dive into the global and US trends on a weekly basis. But yeah, feel free to follow me on the socials and keep up with the data.
Beautiful. And look, Jamie, I'm putting it out there. March 2026, get yourself over to Australia and New Zealand so that you can share some of these insights. We would love to have you. I'm sure that you have so much to give. Look, thank you once again for coming on and sharing all your insights with us. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.